The night was quiet, the kind of quiet that made every small sound feel louder than it should be. Inside a small wooden house at the edge of a sleeping town, a single light burned in the kitchen. The human man stood by the stove, slowly stirring a pot of soup. It was late, too late for most people to cook, but he had always lived alone and he liked silence. His name was Daniel, and after many long days of work, he enjoyed cooking something simple for himself. The steam rose, carrying the smell of warm bread and herbs into the air. It was a peaceful scene, or at least it looked that way. What Daniel did not know was that he was not alone. Just outside the kitchen window, hidden in the shadows, something moved. A figure crouched low, her body weak, her stomach empty. She was not human, not from this world. Her skin faintly shimmered in the moonlight, her eyes larger than his, glowing. With a dull silver light, she was an alien woman, and she was starving. For days she had wandered, searching for scraps, afraid to be seen. Her people were gone, her mate was dead, and she had nothing left. She had not wanted to come this close to a human home, but hunger was stronger than fear. She pressed her thin hands against the window frame, her breath trembling as she looked inside. The smell of the soup made her chest ache with need. Her people never cooked like this, never filled the air with warmth and spice. This smell was human, strange and alive. Her lips parted, her throat dry, and for a moment she wanted to cry. But instead she pushed the window open just enough to slip inside. The old wooden frame creaked softly. Daniel did not hear it. His focus was on the pot. Slowly, silently, the alien woman stepped into the kitchen. Her feet made no sound against the cold floor. Every muscle in her body shook, not from cold, but from fear. She had heard stories about humans. Violent, cruel, quick to kill what they did not understand. If he saw her, he might strike her down. But the hunger was too heavy. It pulled her forward, her eyes fixed on the bread resting on the counter. One piece, just one piece, maybe it could keep her alive a little longer. Daniel turned slightly, lifting a spoon to taste the soup. The alien froze, her breath trapped in her chest. Her heart beat so fast it felt like it might break. If he turned, all the way, if he looked now, everything would be over. She stayed still like a shadow. The spoon touched his lips. He sighed quietly, then set it down. He reached for salt, shaking a little into the pot. Then he leaned back, rubbing his tired eyes. The alien moved, her hand darting out, trembling fingers brushing against the bread. She clutched it and pulled back, pressing the food to her chest like a treasure. Her throat tightened, she wanted to bite it right there, but the sound might betray her. So she stepped back, slowly, carefully, her body nearly brushing against the wall. Daniel shifted again. This time he thought he heard something. A faint sound, like the whisper of cloth moving where it should not. He frowned, turning his head. The alien froze again, every nerve screaming at her to run, but running would make noise, and noise meant death. The man's eyes scanned the kitchen, pausing near the shadows where she stood. Her breath stopped, her hands clutching the bread tighter. For a long moment, nothing moved. Then Daniel shook his head and muttered softly to himself, too tired, hearing things. He turned back to the stove, the wooden spoon scraping against the pot. The alien's chest rose and fell, relief washing over her like a wave. But she knew it would not last. She could not keep stealing like this forever, and she could not stay hidden for long. Humans were not fools. Sooner or later, one of them would see her, and when that happened, she did not know if she would live to see another night. Still, as she stared at the man's back, at the way he calmly stirred his food, something inside her felt strange, something she had not felt in a long time. It was not just hunger, it was not just fear, it was curiosity. What kind of creature was this human to stand in such quiet, to make warmth out of simple food? He looked nothing like her kind, yet there was something steady in the way he moved. She could not name it, but she felt it, and that feeling mixed with her hunger pulled her one step closer, even as her heart begged her to run. The kitchen, once only a human's safe place, had become a battlefield of silence and fear. The alien woman stood in the shadows, clutching stolen bread. The human man stood by the stove, unaware of the eyes fixed on him, and in that fragile space between them, a story was about to begin. Daniel lifted the pot carefully, pouring soup into a single bowl. The warm smell filled the room, mixing with the faint crackle of the stove. He reached for the bread on the counter, but his hand paused in midair. It was gone. The loaf he had placed there earlier was missing. He frowned, looking around the kitchen, sure he had left it in plain sight. Bread did not simply vanish. The alien woman clutched the piece tightly in the shadowed corner. Her breathing was shallow, almost silent, but she knew he would notice soon. Her silver eyes darted to the window, measuring the distance. If she ran, maybe she could escape. But her legs felt weak, her body trembling. And deep inside, another part of her did not want to run. She wanted to know what kind of man could make food smell so alive. Daniel slowly set the bowl on the table, his eyes narrowing. Something was wrong. He picked up a small knife, holding it lightly, more for comfort than for attack. He listened, his ears searching the silence. Then he heard it. The sound of someone breathing, fast and frightened. Not a mouse, not the wind, something bigger. He turned toward the sound. The alien stepped back, her body brushing against the wall. Her stomach twisted in fear. His eyes found her at last, half hidden in the shadows. For one long second, neither moved. Daniel's breath caught, his mind spinning. What stood before him was no thief, no ordinary stranger. Her skin shimmered faintly under the dim light, her face sharp and unfamiliar. Her eyes glowed like molten silver, wide with hunger and fear. He had never seen anything like her, not in books, not in dreams. His hand tightened on the knife. The alien's hand tightened on the bread. For a heartbeat, the room was frozen. Then, instead of running, instead of attacking, she lifted the bread to her lips and took a bite. The crust broke softly, the sound echoing in the quiet kitchen. She chewed quickly, tears welling in her eyes. Daniel blinked, stunned. This creature was not here to kill him, not here to fight. She was here because she was starving. He lowered the knife slowly. "Hungry," she whispered, her voice rough and broken. It was one word, but it was enough. Daniel's chest tightened. He saw her clearly now, not as a monster, not as a threat, but as someone desperate to live. He set the knife down on the counter, raising his hand slowly to show he meant no harm. The alien froze, her body still tense, but he did not move closer. Instead, he pulled another piece of bread from a cupboard. He placed it on the table beside the bowl of soup. Then he stepped back, leaving space between them. The alien's eyes flickered to the food, then back to him. Suspicion battled with hunger in her mind. Her people had always warned her. Humans could not be trusted. Humans were violent. But the smell of soup was stronger than fear. Step by step, shaking, she moved toward the table. Daniel stayed still, his eyes steady but soft. She reached the table, her thin fingers brushing the bowl. Steam rose against her face, warm and gentle. She sat, though her body remained half-turned, ready to flee. Slowly, she dipped the bread into the soup, tasting it. Her eyes widened. The flavor was rich, alive, nothing like the dry scrap she had been surviving on. A small sound escaped her throat. Half a sob, half a sigh. Daniel looked away, giving her the dignity of eating without being watched. But inside, his mind raced. He had just let an alien, an actual alien, sit at his table and eat his food. Should he be afraid? Should he call someone? Yet strangely, he felt no fear now, only a strange calm, a strange pull, as if something important had just begun. The alien ate quickly, her hands trembling. Every bite was both joy and sorrow. Joy, because she was alive. Sorrow, because she knew this kindness could not last. When the bowl was empty, she looked up at him, her lips parted, searching for words. She had lost so much, her mate, her ship, her people. Now she sat in a human's kitchen, fed by a man she should have feared. She wanted to speak, but the words of her language would mean nothing to him. So instead, she whispered the only human word she had learned. "Thank you." Daniel's throat tightened. He had never expected gratitude from a creature he had thought impossible only minutes ago. Her voice was strange, her accent broken, but the meaning was clear. He nodded once, quietly. The silence returned, but it was no longer heavy with fear, it was heavy with questions. Who was she? Where did she come from? Why was she here? And most of all, what would happen next? The alien sat, her silver eyes watching him carefully. For the first time since she had landed on this world, she felt a spark of something she had thought lost. Forever. Not safety. Not yet. But the possibility of it. And that small spark was enough to hold her in the human's kitchen, enough to stop her from running into the cold night. The first contact had been made, not with weapons, but with bread and soup. And though neither of them knew it yet, this simple moment would change everything. The bowl sat empty on the table. Only the faint smell of soup lingered in the air, warm and gentle. The alien woman lowered her head, her hands still gripping the edge of the table as if she feared the food might vanish if she let go. Her breathing slowed, no longer sharp with hunger. For the first time in many nights, her stomach did not ache, but her mind still raced with fear. Daniel stood across the room, leaning against the counter. He had not moved closer, not even once. He could see her trembling, see the way her silver eyes shifted between him and the door. She was ready to run at the smallest threat. And yet, she had stayed long enough to eat. That meant something. The silence stretched, broken only by the ticking of the old clock on the wall. Daniel cleared his throat softly, careful not to startle her. "You don't have to run," he said slowly, his voice calm. She tilted her head, her expression unreadable. The words might have been strange to her ears, but the tone was not. He meant no harm, and she could feel, and the alien's fingers brushed the bowl, tracing the curve of the ceramic. Her people did not eat like this, together, seated, sharing warmth. Food among her kind was only survival, never comfort. Yet here, the act of eating felt different. It felt almost sacred. She looked at him again, her lips parting as if to speak, but only a broken whisper escaped. "Why?" Daniel blinked, surprised that she had managed a question. He let out a small breath, shaking his head. "Because you were hungry," he answered simply. The alien stared, her mind struggling to accept such an answer. Her people had always taught that humans were selfish, dangerous, quick to destroy what they did not understand. But this man had given her food without demand, without anger. It did not fit the stories. Her eyes narrowed, studying him. Was this a trick? Would he capture her? Trade her for reward? Expose her to others? But his face remained calm, his hands open. If it was a trap, it was a strange one. Slowly, she placed the bread crust back on the table, as if returning something valuable. Her silver eyes softened, only a little. "Thank you," she whispered again, her voice steadier than before. Daniel gave a small nod, his lips curving into the faintest smile. "You're welcome," he said. The alien tilted her head at the strange phrase, not knowing its meaning. But the warmth in his tone was enough. Minutes passed, neither moving much. Then Daniel walked to the stove, his movements slow and deliberate. He took the pot and poured a second bowl, placing it gently on the table. Steam curled upward, carrying the smell of herbs and broth. He stepped back again, giving her space. The alien stared at the bowl, her body tense. He was offering more. This was no trick, no mistake. It was an invitation. Her hands shook as she reached forward. She lifted the spoon awkwardly, copying the way he had eaten earlier. The warm liquid touched her lips and her eyes closed for a moment. It was more than food. It was comfort. Her chest ached, not from hunger this time, but from something deeper. Something she had not felt since her mate had died. A fragile sense of being cared for. Daniel watched quietly. He noticed the scars on her arms, the thinness of her frame. She had been through something terrible. That much was clear. He wanted to ask questions, to know who she was, where she came from. But he stayed silent, letting her eat. He knew trust could not be forced. It had to grow slowly, like a seed in dark soil. The alien finished the second bowl more slowly than the first. When she set it down, her eyes met his again. There was still fear there, but also something new. A spark of curiosity, maybe even the start of trust. She tapped her chest lightly, then spoke a word in her own language. The sound was soft, musical, nothing like human speech. Daniel frowned, then pointed at himself. "Daniel," he said. He repeated it once more, tapping his chest. "Daniel." The alien blinked, then nodded slightly. She tried the sound, her voice strange but close enough. "Neil." He gave her a small smile. Then he pointed at her, waiting. She hesitated, her lips pressing together. Finally, she whispered, "Lyra." Daniel nodded once, his voice gentle. "Lyra." Her name filled the space between them, soft, but powerful. For the first time since she had stepped into his kitchen, she no longer felt like a shadow. She felt like someone seen, someone recognized. The night stretched on, the house still quiet, but something inside it had changed. The kitchen was no longer a place of fear. It was becoming a place of trust. Lyra sat at the table, her silver eyes softer now. Daniel stood nearby, no longer thinking of her as a stranger. They were two souls from different worlds, yet for one fragile night, they shared the same table, and with every small word, every piece of food, the space between them grew smaller. Neither of them knew what tomorrow would bring, danger, discovery, maybe even betrayal. But in that moment, trust was being born, not with weapons, not with bargains, but with something simpler, a meal, a name, a fragile thread of understanding. And once woven, such threads had the power to bind even the most distant worlds. The fire in the stove burned low, sending faint orange light across the kitchen walls. Daniel sat at the table now, across from the alien woman who called herself Lyra. The night outside was dark and still, but inside, the air felt heavy with unspoken questions. Daniel wanted to ask her everything, where she came from, why she was here, what she wanted. But he stayed quiet, waiting. He sensed she would speak when she was ready. Lyra's silver eyes drifted to the empty bowl before her. Her hands traced the rim, slow and thoughtful. The warmth of the food still lingered in her chest, but her mind had traveled far away. She looked older in that moment, not in her body, but in her heart. Her shoulders sank as though carrying a weight too heavy for anyone to bear. Finally, she raised her gaze to him. Her voice was quiet, broken, but her words were clear enough. "You want?" "No," she whispered. Daniel nodded slowly, leaning forward just a little. "Yes," he said softly. "But only if you want to tell me." Lyra closed her eyes for a moment, gathering strength. When she opened them again, her voice trembled. "My people gone," she said, the words cutting sharp even in broken English. Daniel's chest tightened. He said nothing, but his silence gave her space to continue. She pressed her hand against her chest, just over her heart. "Mate. Dead," she whispered, the word heavy. Her throat tightened, and for a moment no sound came. Daniel's eyes softened, his hands resting quietly on the table. He did not rush her. He did not need to. Her grief filled the silence more powerfully than words ever could. She took a slow breath and continued. "Hunters came," she said, her voice shaking. Her eyes flickered with memory. Dark ships in the sky, fire raining down, screams in the air. She spoke in fragments, broken sentences, but the meaning was clear. Her people had been attacked, not by humans, but by others she had fled. Her ship shattered in the black sky. Her mate had died protecting her, and she had fallen alone into this strange world. Her voice cracked. "No home. No people. Only me." Tears shimmered at the edge of her silver eyes, though she quickly wiped them away. Among her kind, showing such weakness was shameful. But here, in this kitchen, she could not stop it. The pain was too deep, the loneliness too heavy. Daniel's chest ached as he listened. He could not imagine the scale of her loss, entire families and entire people gone in fire and smoke. And yet she sat here, fragile but alive. She had endured hunger, fear, and grief, and still she breathed. That kind of strength was beyond anything he had ever known. He spoke softly, careful not to break the fragile thread between them. "I'm sorry," he said, simple words but honest. Lyra tilted her head as if testing their meaning. Sorry, a human word. She understood it enough to feel the weight in his tone. Her lips trembled and she gave a small nod. For a long time, neither of them spoke. The fire cracked, the clock ticked, the night pressed close against the windows. But the silence was not empty. It was shared. Daniel's thoughts raced. He could see now that this woman was not just a visitor, not just an alien. She was a survivor, carrying the ghost of her world inside her. Lyra leaned back slightly, her voice dropping low. "Humans? Dangerous," she said, her silver eyes locking on his. "My people always say, humans. Cruel, kill, take, destroy." Daniel stiffened, though he did not argue. It was true. Humans had destroyed much. Wars, greed, endless violence, even. He could not deny that. But then her gaze softened and her next words were quiet, almost confused. "You? Not cruel," she whispered. "You give food, not death." Her voice broke again and she looked away. The confusion in her chest was stronger than hunger now. Her people had painted humans as monsters, but this man was different, and she did not know what to do with that truth. Daniel let out a slow breath. "I'm not special," he said softly. "I'm just me." He smiled faintly, though sadness tugged at his eyes. "Not all humans are cruel," he added. "Some of us try to be better." Lyra studied him, her silver eyes deep and searching. For the first time she wondered if the stories her people told were only half the truth. Maybe humans were dangerous, yes. But maybe they were also something else. Something stronger, stranger. The ability to care even for an enemy. The power to show kindness when there was no reason to. She looked at him for a long time, her voice almost a whisper. "Strange, human," she said. But in her tone, the word was not an insult. It was something closer to wonder. The clock chimed softly in the corner. Daniel poured another small bowl of soup, pushing it toward her. Her hands shook as she accepted it. Not just because of hunger, but because of the fragile trust forming between them. She ate slowly this time, her eyes never leaving his. Every spoonful was not just food. It was a promise. A promise that for tonight at least she was not alone. Outside, the night deepened, hiding the stars, but inside the small kitchen, something brighter than starlight flickered to life. Two souls from different worlds sat across from one another, one broken by loss, the other marked by loneliness, and together, they began to stitch something fragile and new, a bond that even grief could not silence. The night had grown colder, frost clinging to the edges of the window glass, but inside the small kitchen, warmth lingered, not from the stove, but from the fragile connection between two strangers who should have been enemies. Daniel poured himself a little soup, sitting across from Lyra, the alien woman whose silver eyes followed his every move. Her hunger was eased now, but her mind was restless. She had told him pieces of her loss, her grief, her fear, and instead of turning her away, instead of calling others, he had simply listened. It confused her, it unsettled her, and yet it drew her closer. Daniel leaned back in his chair, his voice calm. "You don't have to be afraid here," he said. Lyra tilted her head, unsure. Afraid was the only way she knew how to live. On her world, fear had kept her alive, but here in this kitchen, she felt something she had almost forgotten. A fragile safety, and that safety frightened her in a different way. Her voice was low, hesitant. "You, not hurt me," she said slowly, her words broken but clear. Daniel shook his head. "No. Why would I?" The question puzzled her. On her world, survival often meant hurting others before they hurt you. But this man did not act like that. He did not see her as prey or enemy. He saw her as something else, though she did not yet understand what. Daniel stood, moving to the small cupboard. He opened it and pulled out a blanket, worn but warm. Without a word, he draped it gently over. The back of her chair, Lyra froze, her body tense. It was not an attack, not a trap, just warmth. Her trembling hands touched the fabric. Soft, heavy, carrying the faint smell of wood smoke and bread. Her throat tightened. In her world, blankets were not shared. Kindness was not given freely. This was not survival. This was something greater. Her eyes lifted to his, uncertain. "Why give?" she whispered. Daniel's smile was small but genuine. "Because you need it," he said. As simple as that. The answer made her chest ache. Humans were not supposed to be simple. They were supposed to be cruel, violent, untrustworthy. But this one was simple in a way that shook her more than any weapon could. She pulled the blanket around herself. The warmth seeped into her bones, chasing away the cold that had clung to her since the night she lost everything. Her hands shook, not from hunger now, but from something deeper. She whispered again, her voice breaking. "My people never do this." Daniel raised his brow, slightly. "Never?" She shook her head, her silver eyes dim. "No. Survival. No kindness. Weakness. Death." Daniel's gaze softened. He thought of his own world, its wars, its cruelties, its mistakes. But he also thought of its kindness. Neighbors helping neighbors, strangers sharing food, families caring for one another even when it hurt. "Then maybe," he said softly, "humans aren't as weak as your people thought." Lyra studied him. Her mind caught between what she had been taught and what she now saw with her own eyes. She had been told humans were dangerous. And yes, she could see that in him too. A sharpness in his gaze, a strength in his hands. But beneath it was something else, a stubborn, confusing compassion. The gift of giving without expecting anything in return. Her voice was almost a whisper. "You, strange," she said. Daniel chuckled softly, shaking his head. "I've been called worse," he replied. His laughter was quiet, warm, and it startled her. The sound of it filled the kitchen with something lighter than sorrow. For the first time in many nights, Lyra felt her lips curve, not fully but almost. A shadow of a smile. Daniel leaned forward slightly, resting his arms on the table. "You've lost a lot," he said, his tone serious now. "But you're still here. You're stronger than you think." The words pierced her chest. Stronger? She had felt nothing but weakness since the day her mate died. Yet here was this human, telling her she had strength simply because she survived. Her people had never spoken to her like that. To them, strength was only power, violence, control. But this man saw strength in endurance, in survival, even in brokenness. Her hands tightened on the blanket. Her silver eyes shimmered in the dim firelight. She whispered again, "Human, dangerous." Daniel tilted his head, unsure. But before he could respond, she added softly, "Not for weapons. Dangerous. For this." Her hand lifted, pressing lightly against her chest. "For heart." Daniel's breath caught. He did not fully understand her broken words, but he understood enough. She was beginning to see the truth. Humans were not just dangerous because of their wars, their weapons, their greed. They were dangerous because of their ability to care, to show kindness even when it made no sense, to give trust where none was earned. That was the gift of humanity, and Lyra, broken and grieving, had just begun to feel it. The night wore on. Lyra sat wrapped in the blanket, her body warmer, her heart heavier yet strangely lighter. Daniel cleaned the kitchen quietly, moving with calm simplicity. The world outside was vast and cold. full of threats neither of them could yet name. But in this small room something rare had taken root. A fragile bond, a fragile trust, the gift of humanity. Unexpected, dangerous, unbreakable once given. And though neither of them spoke it aloud, both knew one truth now lingered in the air. This was no longer about hunger, no longer about fear. This was about survival of another kind, the survival of hope. A night was deep and still when Daniel finally put out the stove fire. The kitchen dimmed into soft shadows, only the faint glow of a lantern lighting the room. Lyra sat wrapped in the blanket, her silver eyes half closed. Her hunger was quiet. Now her body less weak, but her heart was heavy with new thoughts. For the first time since her mate had died, she had felt something close to comfort, and it frightened her. Daniel leaned against the counter, arms folded. He watched her silently. She looked less like a stranger now and more like someone caught between two worlds, hers and his. But even in the quiet, he sensed something building, in the air. A storm waiting to break. Lyra's gaze flicked toward the window, her body tensing. She felt it first. An unease. A warning. Her kind could sense danger long before it appeared. She rose from the chair slowly, pulling the blanket tighter around her thin frame. Her voice was low, almost a whisper. "They come." Daniel frowned. "Who?" Lyra's eyes darkened. "Hunters," she said, the word bitter and sharp. Not animals, not beasts, but others. Those who had destroyed her ship, who had killed her mate. Her enemy had not given up. They were still searching, and she had led them here. Daniel's chest tightened. If what she said was true, then his quiet home was no longer safe. "Are they close?" he asked. Lyra nodded once, her silver eyes flashing with fear. "Soon," she whispered. Her hands clenched the blanket as if it were armor. "I must leave." The words struck him harder than he expected. Leave. It was the smart choice, the safe choice. If she left, the danger would pass him by. But the thought of her walking back into the cold, hunted and alone, cut deeper than he wanted to admit. He shook his head, his voice firm. "No, not alone." Lyra stared at him, confused. "You help? They kill you too," she said, her voice sharp with warning. Daniel's jaw tightened. "Maybe," he admitted. "But if I let you walk out that door, they'll kill you for certain." He met her eyes, steady. "I can't do that." Her chest ached at his words. Why? Why would a human risk himself for her? She had brought nothing but danger, yet he stood ready to fight for her. It made no sense, and yet it made something inside her tremble, something close to hope. She shook her head quickly. "No, Daniel. My fight, not yours." Daniel stepped closer, his voice quiet but strong. "Then it's our fight now." The kitchen seemed smaller, the air heavier. Lyra's hands trembled, torn between fear and something she did not want to name. Her people would never have made such a choice. To risk for another without gain was madness, weakness. But this human called it strength, and she could not deny the fire in his voice. A faint hum reached her ears then, low and distant. Her body stiffened. The hunter's craft was near. It sounded like metal tearing through the sky. Her silver eyes darted to the window, her breath quickening. "They hear," she whispered. Daniel followed her gaze but saw only darkness. Still, he trusted her words. He grabbed an old rifle from the wall, checking its chamber with steady hands. Lyra flinched at the sight of the weapon, but Daniel's grip was not one of cruelty. It was one of protection. "Stay close," he said firmly. Lyra's heart raced. Every instinct told her to run, to leave before he was caught in her storm. But her feet would not move. Something in her refused to leave him behind. The hum grew louder, vibrating through the walls of the house. Daniel's jaw tightened. He could feel the choice hanging in the air. Turn her over, or stand beside her. He thought of the moment she first whispered, "Hungry." Her eyes filled with fear and need. He thought of her, name Lyra, spoken softly across the table. He thought of the warmth of giving when she had wrapped herself in his blanket. and he knew there was no choice at all. He glanced at her, his voice calm but certain. If they want you, they'll have to go through me. Lyra's chest tightened, her silver eyes shimmering in the lantern light. Her people had always said humans were selfish, but this one was ready to risk his life for her. It made no sense, yet it was real. Her whisper was broken but strong enough to reach him. You, foolish, she said. But in her voice there was no insult. There was something closer to respect. The house shook as a beam of light swept across the field outside. Shadows danced on the walls. The hunters had arrived. Lyra and Daniel stood side by side in the small kitchen, two souls from different worlds bound by a fragile thread of trust. The night was no longer silent. It was the beginning of a battle. And in that fragile moment, with danger at the door, Lyra understood the truth of humanity more clearly than ever. Humans were dangerous, yes. But not only because of their weapons, they were dangerous because they could choose. And Daniel had chosen her. The beam of light swept across the fields, harsh and white against the night. It cut through the kitchen window, spilling across the floorboards. Daniel stood with his rifle steady in his hands, his body calm but tense. Beside him, Lyra's silver eyes glowed in the half-dark, her breath sharp and quick. The hunters had come, and there was no more time to hide. Outside, the low hum of their craft grew louder. The sound was like a predator circling its prey. Daniel's heart thudded in his chest, but his face remained steady. He had lived through storms, through loss, through lonely nights. This moment felt heavier than all of them, because this time, he was not only fighting for himself, he was fighting for someone else. Lyra's hands clenched the edge of the blanket still wrapped around her. Her body trembled, not from cold, but from memory. She remembered the flames, the screams, her mate's last breath. She remembered how her people had been hunted down without mercy. And now the hunters were here again. Only this time, she was not alone. Her silver eyes flicked to Daniel. He stood tall, stubborn, ready. A human, fragile yet unshaken. Her chest tightened with something fierce, something she had thought lost. Hope. The door rattled suddenly. A heavy thud echoed through the kitchen. Daniel raised the rifle. Stay back, he whispered to her. The door burst open, splintering under force. Figures stepped inside. Tall, armored, their movements sharp and precise. Their eyes burned red beneath their helmets, their weapons humming with deadly light. The first, Hunter's voice was cold and mechanical. Target located, it said, its gaze locking on Lyra. Lyra stepped back, her body trembling. Daniel moved in front of her without hesitation. You're not taking her, he said, his voice low but firm. The hunters paused, their weapons lifting. They had expected fear, surrender, not defiance. Daniel's finger tightened on the trigger. The crack of the rifle broke the silence, echoing loud in the small house. One hunter staggered, sparks bursting from its armor. The others turned their weapons toward him, beams of light cutting the air. Daniel ducked, pulling Lyra down with him. The room filled with heat and fire, the air sharp with smoke. Lyra's body shook, her mind screaming to run. But then she looked at Daniel. His jaw clenched, his eyes fierce, his body shielding hers. A man who had no reason to fight for her. Yet here he was, standing against death itself. Her breath caught, and something inside her broke open. No, not broke, ignited. She reached out, her silver hands glowing faintly. Her kind carried a power deep within, a gift they rarely used, a force meant for survival. But grief had stolen it from her. Now, with Daniel's courage beside her, it returned, her palms lit with pale light. The hunters turned toward her, their red eyes flashing. And for the first time, she did not retreat. She rose beside the human, her voice sharp with strength. No more, she whispered. The light burst from her hands, striking one of the hunters. Its body crashed against the wall, armor shattering under the force. Daniel fired again, steady and sure. Together, human and alien fought side by side, not as enemies, not as strangers, but as allies bound by something greater than fear. The last hunter stumbled back, sparks burning across its armor. Its gaze flicked between them, confusion in its red glow. It had expected prey, instead it had found resistance. Resistance stronger than weapons. Resistance born from trust? The hunters retreated, their craft humming louder as they pulled away into the night. The house was silent again, smoke curling in the air. Daniel lowered his rifle, his breath heavy. Lyra stood trembling, her glowing, hands fading back into pale skin. For a long moment neither spoke. The battle was over, but its weight still filled the room. Finally, Lyra turned to him, her silver eyes wet with tears. "You should not fight," she whispered, her voice shaking. "You could die." Daniel gave a tired smile. "Maybe," he said softly. "But I'd rather die fighting for what's right than live doing nothing." Her chest ached at his words. Her people had never spoken like that. To them, survival was the only goal. But this man showed her something else. That survival meant nothing without meaning. That sometimes the greatest strength was not in weapons, but in heart. She stepped closer, her voice breaking. "My people." "Wrong," she whispered. Her eyes met his, shimmering with something fierce. "They say humans cruel, weak, selfish. But you prove them wrong." Daniel shook his head slightly, his voice calm. "I'm just one man," he said. But Lyra shook her head harder. "No. You show truth," she said. "Humans. Dangerous, yes, but dangerous. Because you care." The words lingered in the smoke-filled kitchen. Heavy, powerful, true. Daniel met her gaze, and for the first time since she had entered his home, she did not look like a stranger. She looked like something more, an equal, a companion, maybe even a friend. The night outside stretched on, the stars hid,